Alex steadied his breath, forcing himself not to run. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, but years as a field geologist had taught him that panic in the wilderness could be fatal. He clicked his flashlight to high beam, sweeping the dense forest around him. The light caught glimpses of pale mist weaving between the trunks, curling unnaturally as though it had intent. The soil beneath his boots vibrated again, stronger this time, rattling loose stones and sending a cascade of pine needles to the ground. His mind raced through rational explanations. Earthquake, shifting plates, underground river, but nothing fit the rhythm of the tremors. They came too evenly spaced, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat rising from the earth itself. Alex crouched low, pressing his palm flat against the ground. The vibration pulsed steadily, and with each surge he felt it resonate in his chest. Something beneath the forest floor was alive, or at least moving. He swung his pack around, pulling out a compact seismograph he always carried on deep expeditions. The needle immediately spiked, then steadied into a repeating pattern. It wasn't random seismic activity. It was coordinated. The forest around him seemed to hold its breath. No owls called. No insects hummed. Even the wind had stilled, as if the entire ecosystem was bracing for what came next. The air temperature dropped sharply, and Alex could see his breath plume in the beam of his flashlight. Then came the sound, faint at first, like a murmur rising from below. He froze. The noise grew clearer, layered, almost melodic. Not rock grinding against rock. Not water rushing underground. This was a voice. Multiple voices. A chorus. The ground beneath him swelled slightly, as if something enormous shifted closer to the surface. Alex stumbled backward, the beam of his light catching movement between the trees. At first he thought it was shadows, until one of them blinked. Two luminous shapes emerged from the mist, towering forms that dwarfed any bear or elk he had ever seen. Their silhouettes were massive, yet their movements carried an unsettling precision. They weren't stumbling beasts. They were organized. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the pale light, and Alex realized with a sickening twist that the tremors weren't just random quakes. They were footsteps. The earth trembled once more, heavier, closer, and the voices below rose into a haunting resonance that wrapped around him. Alex's rational mind screamed for logic, but deep inside, one undeniable truth clawed its way to the surface. He hadn't just discovered geological activity. He had stumbled into something ancient, something that had been waiting. Alex staggered backward until his shoulders hit the rough bark of a cedar tree. His flashlight trembled in his grip, the beams sliding across the massive shapes in front of him. For a fleeting second, he thought they might be bears, but their proportions were all wrong. Their torsos were elongated, their limbs thick as ancient roots, and their skin, or was it bark, gleamed in the pale light with a texture that looked like living stone. The ground pulsed again, this time in rhythm with their movements, and Alex realized with a jolt of terror, the tremors weren't coming from beneath the forest. They were caused by these beings, each step sinking into the soil with seismic weight. His seismograph screeched, the needle jerking violently. Alex fumbled to silence it, terrified the noise might draw attention, but it was too late. Both figures stopped, their glowing eyes fixed directly on him. A strange stillness pressed down over the clearing, so heavy Alex could hear the rush of blood in his ears. Then one of the giants tilted its head, studying him with a deliberation that felt uncomfortably human. The other lifted an arm, impossibly long, and pressed what looked like a hand against the ground. The tremors immediately shifted. The pulse beneath Alex's feet wasn't random anymore. It was patterned. He blinked hard, gripping the cedar for balance. No, not just patterned. It was structured, like a drumbeat. A message. The chorus of voices beneath the earth swelled louder, and Alex's stomach clenched as he realized it wasn't a chorus at all. The entire forest floor was vibrating with thousands of overlapping tones, merging into something that resembled language. The giant nearest him released a sound, a low, resonant hum that rattled through Alex's ribcage. wasn't threatening, but it was deliberate. The other responded with a sharper vibration, pounding its hand once more into the soil. Immediately, the voices below shifted in harmony, as if taking commands. Alex's fear was replaced by a horrifying sense of awe. He wasn't facing animals. He wasn't even sure these were entirely biological. They moved with intent, communicated with structure, and the earth itself seemed to respond to their will. His training told him to document. So with shaking hands, he raised his camera and snapped a frame. The flash burst across the clearing. The giants recoiled slightly, their glowing eyes narrowing. For a heart-stopping moment, Alex thought he had made a fatal mistake. But then, to his astonishment, one of them leaned closer. Slowly, cautiously, it reached toward him, not with claws or violence, but with a gesture so deliberate it sent shivers down his spine. It tapped its massive finger against the ground 3 times. The vibrations echoed outward in perfect rhythm, spreading through the soil, traveling miles. The forest responded. Alex could hear it. The shifting of roots, the groaning of trees, the whisper of leaves stirring though no wind blew. The entire ecosystem was answering. Sweat ran cold down his neck as he realized what he was witnessing. These beings weren't just moving through the forest. They were directing it. The silence, the trembling earth, the unnatural mist, this was all orchestrated. And then, from deep within the forest, Alex heard it. A sound so vast, so powerful, that his legs nearly gave way. It was another set of footsteps. Heavier, closer. Whatever these beings were, they weren't alone. Alex clutched the cedar trunk so tightly that splinters dug into his palms. The tremors grew heavier, each one rolling through the soil like distant thunder. If the 2 towering figures before him had seemed enormous, then whatever was approaching made them look small by comparison. His flashlight beam jittered across the trees as the ground shook harder, dislodging clumps of earth and sending vibrations deep into his bones. The 2 giants turned in unison, their glowing eyes shifting toward the source of the oncoming footsteps. Neither moved to flee. Instead, they adjusted their stances, lowering themselves slightly as though preparing for something ritualistic, not violent. The chorus beneath the ground swelled again, rising into a layered cadence that seemed to echo across miles of forest. Then, the forest itself reacted. Branches overhead quivered without wind. Sap dripped in shimmering rivulets from wounded trunks. The mist thickened until Alex could barely see beyond the beams of his flashlight. Within that haze, a new silhouette emerged. It was colossal. The figure towered above the others, its outline blurred by the swirling fog. But as it stepped forward, the forest floor groaned under its weight. Alex's seismograph screamed again, the needle burying itself at maximum amplitude. This was not just a creature. It was a moving earthquake. The 2 smaller giants dropped to one knee, their heads bowed. Alex's heart hammered in his chest. Whatever hierarchy existed among these beings, he was now standing in the presence of its apex. For a long moment, the massive figure simply stood, its form cloaked in shadow. Then it lowered its head, and Alex caught a glimpse of its face, or what resembled one. Its features were carved with the raw texture of granite, yet alive, as though stone had learned to breathe. Its eyes glowed brighter than the others, a molten amber that pierced through the mist and locked directly onto him. Alex's breath caught. He wasn't prey. He wasn't invisible. He was seen. The leader extended an arm thicker than a tree trunk and pressed its palm into the ground. Instantly, the tremors shifted again, but this time the rhythm was slower, deeper, more commanding. The chorus of voices responded like a choir obeying a conductor, their vibrations aligning into a single resonant pulse. And then Alex understood with chilling clarity. The entire forest wasn't just reacting. It was obeying. Roots twisted the soil beneath his boots, curling upward like serpents before settling back down. Branches groaned and shifted, creating shapes that resembled doorways in the mist. The ecosystem was alive in a way science had never imagined, and these beings were its orchestrators. His hands shook violently, but Alex forced his camera up again. He captured frame after frame, the flash igniting the mist and freezing the impossible in bursts of light. But the leader reacted differently this time. As the third flash burst across the clearing, it raised its head and released a sound that made Alex's vision blur. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't even a word in any human sense. It was vibration made manifest, so deep, so powerful, it rattled his organs. He dropped to his knees, clutching his chest, as if the sound might shatter him from the inside out. The other two figures joined in, their tones harmonizing into something that was no longer just noise. It was a message. Alex didn't understand the language, but his instinct screamed the meaning. This was a warning. The mist around him began to thin, parting just enough for him to glimpse movement in the distance. Shapes, smaller, faster, less defined, darted between the trees. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The leader turned sharply, its molten gaze fixed on the horizon, and released another earth-shaking pulse. This time, the ground's chorus shifted pitch, becoming urgent, commanding. The forest seemed to bristle in response, roots tightening, branches lowering, as if preparing for a siege. Alex's mouth went dry. Whatever these beings were, they weren't alone in this forest. And they weren't the only force at play tonight. He tried to move, to retreat, but his body felt sluggish, weighed down by the lingering resonance in his chest. The leader's gaze swept back to him, and for the briefest moment, Alex swore he saw something in its eyes. Not rage, not hunger, but recognition. It raised one massive hand and pointed eastward. The gesture was deliberate, unmistakable. Just like the bear's guiding mic in Alaska, this was direction, a command. The message could not have been clearer. Leave now, before you see what comes next. But Alex couldn't move. Not yet, because despite the primal fear surging through his veins, another force anchored him in place: curiosity. His entire career had been built on uncovering the unknown, and here it was, standing before him, commanding the very earth. The forest fell utterly silent again, just as it had at the beginning. Alex realized, with dread and wonder colliding in equal measure, that silence was not absence. It was anticipation, and in that breathless pause, the first sound of the others arrived, distant, guttural, rising through the mist like an approaching storm. Alex forced himself upright, every muscle trembling as the guttural sounds grew louder from beyond the mist. They weren't footsteps this time. They were shrieks, unnatural, jagged sounds that tore through the forest air like metal scraping on stone. Each cry carried an echo that made the ground quiver, different from the measured, resonant pulses of the giants before him. The two kneeling figures rose instantly, shifting into rigid stances as though preparing for battle. The leader, massive, immovable, pressed its palm against the earth once more. The vibrations shifted from slow, deliberate pulses to rapid commands, like the urgent beat of war drums. The forest responded. Roots erupted from the soil, weaving into tangled barricades. Branches above twisted together, forming thick canopies that darkened the clearing. Even the mist seemed to obey, swirling into dense walls that shielded the giants' positions. Alex stared in awe. The forest itself was being weaponized. And then he saw them. Figures emerged through the mist, smaller than the stone-skinned giants, but no less terrifying. Their forms were crooked, hunched, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Unlike the beings before him, these creatures radiated chaos. Their eyes glowed a sickly green, piercing the fog, and their shrieks crescendoed as they approached. Dozens of them, maybe more. The ground shook again, not from the orderly rhythm of the giants, but from the frantic pounding of these new arrivals. Alex's heart slammed against his ribs. He had stumbled into a war. The leader roared, or rather, released another seismic resonance. This one was deafening, shaking dust from the trees and rattling Alex's teeth. The two smaller giants lunged forward, their enormous arms sweeping like fallen oaks. The ground obeyed their gestures. Roots, lashed upward, ensnaring the first wave of creatures. Screeches split the night as the twisted beings struggled, their limbs thrashing against living restraints. But more kept coming. The mist tore apart as wave after wave of green-eyed figures surged into the clearing. They were relentless, climbing over one another, clawing through the forest defenses with inhuman persistence. Alex stumbled backward, his flashlight beam cutting across grotesque faces twisted into permanent snarls. These weren't animals. They weren't human either. They were something else entirely. Things born of decay, of corruption, of everything opposite to the harmonious power of the giants. The leader moved forward, every step a seismic event. With each impact, the forest rallied. Roots thickened, trunks bent to block pathways. The very soil shifted to destabilize the enemy. Yet even this living fortress couldn't hold them all back. Alex ducked as one of the creatures broke through, charging directly at him. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its jaw stretched wide in a scream that rattled his bones. He raised his flashlight instinctively, and the beam struck its face. The creature recoiled with a shriek, stumbling into the roots that immediately coiled around it like serpents. His chest heaved. The flashlight wasn't just light. It was protection, however brief. The giants fought with terrifying precision. Every movement of their massive limbs corresponded with the Earth's response. One slammed its fist into the soil, and a ridge of stone erupted, flinging half a dozen creatures into the air. Another swiped its arm, and branches snapped downward like whips, crushing attackers beneath splintered wood. But the enemy adapted. The green-eyed horde clawed through barricades, tearing at roots with unnatural strength. For every creature crushed, two more took its place. Their numbers were endless, their frenzy unstoppable. The forest groaned under the strain, ancient trees shuddering as if in agony. Alex's camera was still strapped around his neck, but his instincts screamed at him to move, not record. Still, he forced himself to lift it, snapping frantic shots between breaths. If he survived, this would be proof. Proof of something humanity had never imagined. The leader turned sharply, molten eyes locking on him again. For a heartbeat, Alex froze. Then it extended its massive hand. Not toward him this time, but toward the east, the same direction it had pointed before. The message was unmistakable. Leave now. But Alex hesitated. If he left, he might live. But if he stayed, he could document something no human had ever seen. An ancient war between forces that controlled nature itself. His mind tore between survival and discovery, between instinct and obsession. The decision was ripped from him when the ground directly beneath his boots split open. He leapt aside just as jagged roots burst upward, wrapping around a green-eyed creature that had nearly reached him. The roots crushed it with a sickening crack before retreating back into the soil. Alex landed hard, breathless, his decision made for him. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted eastward, branches whipping against his arms. Behind him, the battle raged. The forest shook violently, resonant roars colliding with shrill screeches. Flashes of molten light from the giant's eyes pierced the mist, illuminating grotesque silhouettes of writhing attackers. Still, Alex couldn't resist glancing back. Through the haze, he saw the leader stand taller than ever, its entire body glowing faintly as if the stone-like skin had cracked to reveal magma beneath. It raised both arms skyward, and the ground responded with cataclysmic force. An entire wall of earth erupted behind Alex, sealing the clearing in a barricade of stone and root. The sound was deafening. The ground heaved, and then silence, broken only by the fading echoes of the giant's resonance. Alex collapsed against a tree trunk, gasping for breath. His flashlight flickered, barely cutting through the mist that lingered even outside the barricade. He clutched his camera to his chest, sweat and dirt streaking his face. Whatever battle was unfolding behind that wall, he wasn't meant to see it. The leader had made that clear. But one thought burned hotter than his fear, brighter than the molten glow still etched in his memory. The world had no idea what existed out here. And Alex Carter, now, carry the proof. Alex stumbled through the forest until his legs threatened to give out. The eastern horizon glowed faintly, not with fire but with the first pale hints of dawn. His body ached, his mind spun, yet he clutched his camera as if it were the only thing tethering him to reality. When he finally broke through the tree-line, the forest behind him seemed to exhale, the mist thinning into scattered wisps that vanished with the rising sun. No more tremors shook the ground. No more resonant voices rumbled below. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. Not ominous. Protective. Alex collapsed onto the gravel of an old logging road, the cold surface grounding him after a night that felt like a dream stitched from terror and wonder. He replayed the images burned into his mind. Giants commanding the earth, a forest alive with purpose, a battle against creatures that should not exist. His camera held evidence, but his memory held something more dangerous. The knowledge that nature harbored secrets deeper than science had ever dared to imagine. In the distance, a truck engine growled. Rangers, perhaps, or locals heading into the woods at sunrise. Alex wanted to wave them down, to unload every impossible truth. But as the vehicle drew closer, he hesitated. How could he explain what he'd seen without sounding insane? How could photographs capture the resonance that rattled his bones, the intelligence that gleamed in molten eyes? He pressed the camera against his chest and closed his eyes. Not yet. The world wasn't ready. As the truck slowed and a voice called out to him, Alex realized something with startling clarity. The giants hadn't destroyed him when they could have. They had guided him out, spared him, even protected him. That meant one thing. Whatever war had erupted in the forest last night, it wasn't over. And when the world finally learned the truth, Alex Carter's story would be the beginning.